What quilter doesn't love precuts? They make our life so easy. Our quilts go together more quickly. We have curated bundles that are perfectly matched, and it's great fun to select a beautiful bundle of precuts and bring them home. Now, we all have our favorites, and I know mine in particular are Fat Quarters, and I have been using them almost exclusively for decades. But then I started cutting them, and it took a while. I know precuts are made to be used and cut, especially Fat Quarters, and it took me a long time to get over that because I just liked collecting them. Well, this is going to be a revelation for some of you who are still in the collecting mode of putting your precuts up on shelves. We're going to find a way to use them today. I'm Leah Louise from Inspired Quilting by Leah Louise, and I love using Fat Quarters, and I love cutting them up into pieces that I can use in different sizes for various quilt patterns and get them set for my favorite pieces and put the combinations together that I enjoy and choose the favorite prints that I have. Mine generally are florals and botanics. They're my favorite, absolutely. But what I want to show you today is a wonderful way to use the rest of those precuts. Not every quilt we make is going to use every bit of precut that we buy. So we have some extra pieces. And for me in particular, when I cut up a Fat Quarter, yes, I do cut them up and use them for charm squares or for layer cakes or even jelly rolls. There's usually a few pieces left over, and that goes in my Fat Quarter stash, my leftover pile. And that's where I go when I'm making a new quilt and I'm looking at sizes and trying to decide what piece I want to work. This is a wonderful opportunity to use up those pieces. You are going to be amazed at how much you're going to be able to clear out your scrap pile with this quilt. There's a couple different ways to do it, and I will link it to the original video that was made with actual 2.5-inch strips. This one is made with 10-inch strips, and it goes so much more quickly. So let me show you. I want to get started right away. I'm ready to quilt. But first, please subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, I'd like to let everyone know that we're having a good time here, and give me a thumbs up if you would. I'd certainly appreciate it. So let's get started. I want to show you my quilt. You may remember this quilt from a few months ago. It's been really popular, and it's a wonderfully easy, quick quilt, and I want to show you a different way to make it. This was done all with jelly rolls, with 2.5-inch strips by the width of fabric. Sewed them together, made the strip sets, cut them, did all that. And I love it. It turned out great. And it's really wonderful for a scrappy quilt. And what I want to show you is another way to do it, focusing more on Fat Quarters and layer cakes, because these are 10-inch strips. And that's perfect for a layer cake. It makes it very easy for cutting out of a Fat Quarter. And I want to show you how this is going to work. Now, the biggest, I think, difference about this, technically this is a rail fence. It's a rail fence block. Now, it doesn't lay out that way because it's a rectangle, but what I like is that we get this crossbar that alternates each row. And the good thing about that is that while these two seams are going to match, these do not. So essentially we're flipping the rows back and forth in order to have these offset seams. Makes it easier to sew, makes it quicker to sew, and it creates a wonderful design. And so I want to show you how to do it that way. And I have some fabric laid out right here, ready to go. These are the fabrics I've selected for what I'm going to do in today's demo. So these are the blocks that I'm going to use as the primary focal fabrics. They're going to be the 10-inch strips. And then this is going to be my background, or the lateral short bars that go on each of these strip sets. And I wanted to go something a bit neutral. I wanted to have a little bit of color just for interest, but yet I don't want it to compete with what I have here. So I chose some light yellow gold fabrics, which works well with everything here. I brought in some more golds up in these fabrics just to kind of keep that color going through. But what I want to show you is I have cut everything here into 10-inch squares. They're either left over from a layer cake or I cut them out of a fat quarter. And I will link the fat quarter tutorial, the video that you can watch on how I cut fat quarters so that you can get layer cakes or charm squares. Those are the two most popular cuts that I make out of my fat quarters. And it works beautifully because I get a good sized piece that I can use. I can cut up some smaller pieces, and I still have extra in my scrap pile once I'm done with it. And because I like to use so many fat quarters in each quilt, so many different prints, I always have a lot to choose from. So I do have some brand new fabrics here I haven't used before, and I have some old time favorites, and just a few that were around that I hadn't gotten to use yet. So let me show you how this is going to work. You are going to really enjoy how quickly this goes together. So the first step I'm going to take is consider how these blocks are going to match, how these fabrics are all going to fit together. And because there's 3 strips per block, I'm going to divide these into 3 color groups, primarily pink and a sort of raspberry burgundy, along with the corresponding fabrics that match in a lighter background. These are the greens and gold with a little bit of turquoise, and these are primarily the turquoise and blues. So every block will have one from each of these, more or less. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to mix these up because I don't want all the same with the same fabrics. Now, because I have one of everything, that's not going to be an issue. But if you're using multiples of the same fabric, you don't want to mix these two together repeatedly. You would want to pick something else to put them together with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 darks and 2 lights. And then I'm going to do the same here. And let's see, so we'll take a light gold with those 2 golds, these and this. So we'll put these together. And I think I'll put those up here. So I'll put the pink with some golds. I'll go 4 and 4. They're going to match up. These each have 4. Then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'll take this one. Actually, because these are darker fabrics, let me take a look. I may rethink this. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and we'll put this one down here. Just because these are darker, I want to add a couple here that are lighter. So I am going to pair these up now, and I'm going to show you how we're going to sew them. So we'll have our blues in one pile and our sort of pink colors in the other, and we're just going to mix them up. Now, if something in particular strikes your fancy, go ahead and put them together, and this right off the bat caught my eye. I like the pink one with this turquoise, and then I'll match these up after. But what we need to do is draw a line down the center of one of the blocks, because we're going to make multiple seams, and then we are going to make multiple cuts. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a line at 5 inches from top to bottom, one end to the other. And just do that real quick. I'm using a pen. I'm not going to see this. This is going to be my cutting line, so we don't have to worry about it being seen on the front of the quilt. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cut these and then how to put this together. This is the first step. And then once these are all sewn together, we'll cut them apart and I'll show you how we put them together to make our blocks. Okay, so I have 2 of my layer cakes, front to back with right sides together. And you can see my line right here, and I stitched a 1/4 inch away. That's the first thing. Now, if you like to press your seams as you go, this is the best time to do it. What I find is that by creating one sewing line, pressing from here out and here out, is going to get your fabric lined up and flat, so you'll have some good smooth sewing, just in case there's any wrinkles. I would not recommend sewing multiple and then pressing it, because even though you lay this as flat as you can, as you press and you tend maybe just to push a little bit, you're going to stretch the fabric. It could twist, it could, do whatever it is the fabric does, and then you get little pleats along the edges and you won't get a flat seam. So just sew once, and then we're going to press this, and then we'll continue sewing. And the way we do that is right here. Okay, this is one I had to trim off. I did not cut my 10-inch quite as accurately as I thought. The pre-cuts that I had that were already cut were perfect. Mine, on the other hand, well, I was in too much of a hurry. But you'll notice what I did is I just put the extra on this edge that's not going to be sewn, because then I can go ahead and trim it off. But we've got our line right here. So I have the first line, I pressed everything, then I did this second line and a 1/4 inch here. Now I'm going to turn it over so you can see it. You don't see the center line, but you can see the stitching. What I recommend is that you focus on a consistent seam allowance. Ideally, it's a 1/4 inch, but whatever it is that you're comfortable with that you sew, maybe it's a scant or a little bit generous, just be consistent, because we want all these to be the same size. We're going to cut these into smaller units, and then we're going to take these and sew another strip on, and so we want some consistency. So let me show you how we cut this. I have my line drawn right here, so I'm going to use that as my basis. So the first thing, because remember now, I have both edges sewn and 2 seams down the center. I'm going to line my ruler up at 2.5 on the line that I drew. So 2.5 inches will bring me into the center of this half of the block. So I'm cutting in 2.5 here, because remember the center is at 5 inches. Then I'm going to cut the center line. I'm going to cut right on it. And then on this piece, I'm going to cut the 2.5 inch to the outer edge, which will leave me a 2.5 inch piece here. So when all is said and done, I have 4 pieces that are at 2.5 inches. And they're each going to be the same pair. But what I'm going to do is put them in 4 different piles, because I'll use one group at a time. That way the fabrics get spread out throughout the quilt. Now, the other thing we need to do next is create our strip sets. So now that we have 2 sewn together, we need to add a 3rd piece in order to get our 3rd rail. And there's a couple ways we can do that. I want to show you these here that are finished. So they're sewn together, and then I just press them all to one side. Whatever side, it doesn't matter at all. It truly doesn't. So we have some pieces here. Now, you can take your strip pair that you've already sewn, and you can have some, let's say you have some pre-cut 2.5 inch strips. I actually had some left in my scrap pile, so I pulled some of these out, cut them to 10 inches, and then I can add my 3rd piece that way. But there's another way you can do it that I want to show you. Let's see, this goes here. And that is with this here. So you'll notice on this one, here we go, we can see the stitching. There's my center line. I stitched on each side. I stitched over on this edge, but I didn't stitch here. So what that's going to do is I'm going to cut this just like I would have ordinarily. I'm going to line my 2.5 inch line on the ruler with the line that I drew. So what I'm doing here is cutting off 2.5 inch strips, and these can be added to my other pairs. So that's a couple different ways that you can do it. You can have 2.5-inch strips cut from other longer 2.5-inch pieces that you had in your scrap pile, or maybe left over from a jelly roll. Or you can only get 3 strips out of each of your layer cakes and have an extra pair. But there is yet one other way, and I'm going to show you that here. So I had some of my extra blocks, and I'm just going to lay these on top of each other. And I want to get them pretty darn even. Now these are different manufacturers, so they're not all going to be exactly the same. And if you've dealt with fat quarters or precuts in general, okay, this is a really big one. I'm putting that on the bottom. If you've dealt with precuts in general, you notice they're not all created equal. But that's okay, as long as you are consistent in how you manage them. So these 3 are at my 10-inch. And again, this pink one is one that I cut. So I was obviously being quite generous when I was cutting it. Well, that's not so bad. I thought it was sticking out more than it was. But we're good. All right, so I have these pieces, and what I'm going to do is just cut them into 4 sections. So I want to move those out of the way, and I'm going to cut them into 4 strips at 2.5 inches. So I'll come right here, and I'm going to line this up on 2.5 inches from there. And then I'm going to line this 2.5 inches. And I'm making sure that this lines up my 5-inch over here, because I need to make sure I leave myself 5 inches on this side. So that's just a good double check. Now at this point, if I wanted, I have these loose pieces. I could come in and just sew down this side, cut it in half, and I have more pairs. So I just want you to see how you can switch up your fabrics and the way they're combined. There's a lot of different options, and that makes this just a wonderful scrap quilt, because you can do it so many different ways. So I have these pieces, and I have some of these already cut. So this is all good to go. And these I'm going to go ahead and sew side to side. That'll be ready. Now, once we have our patches together, our strip sets, we need to see what our width is, and we need to make sure that they're all the same. If they're a little different, we're going to find a number in between that fits. So for example, if I put this one right here on number 15, I should be at 6.5. But, well, I almost am. I'm closer to 6 and about 3/8. So let's see where I am here. All right, that one's on the half. And this one's on the half. So 6.5 is pretty good. I feel comfortable with that. I can kind of fudge the, oh, here's one that's a little short too. So I'm just going to have to be careful and watch my seams. I'm probably going to cut my cross rail just shy of 6.5, and then I will be allowing myself enough room for my seam allowance. So what I'm going to do now is cut the fabric for those rails. And I'm using a light fabric, a very light background that has a bit of yellow in it, which the yellow is going to work great with the pink, the turquoise, the greens, the golds. It's just a good color that fits with all of them. So I'm going to line these up nice and even. And they all have a print. You can't really see this unless it's up close. I think there's it's a watercolor, but then there's a light white crosshatch across it. So everything has a print. Nothing is a complete solid, which makes me happy, because I like to have lots to look at when I do my quilts. Okay. So I am going to go ahead at this point and cut them at 6.5. what I'll do is I'll make sure I center this on my strip set. So if one of these strip sets is a little narrower, then I'll let the 6.5 inch hang over a little bit on each side. That way I can see where I stand and what I'm going to need to do. So the first thing is to cut this at 6.5 inches. So this is a 6-inch ruler, so I need to add my 1/2 inch and come down here to 6.5, right there, and that leaves me with a 3.5 inch strip. Now, if you need extra pieces, you can use this and cut it down to 2.5 by 6.5. So that works out really well too. So like I said, this, you're going to be able to use lots of different pieces out of your scrap pile, which is awesome. So we're going to do the 2.5. I'm going to use my smaller ruler for this one. All right, these are going to be cut at 2.5. There's 2.5. I'll cut this one at the 5. With all your strip sets sewn at 10 inches and 3 strips wide, they should be approximately 6.5 inches from side to side. And that's where we cut our basically our background is what this would be, or this is going to be our rail. And this then is going to be cut the same width at 6.5 by 2.5. So each strip set that we have cut at 10 inches is going to have this piece added on, and then we press it. Then once all these are completed, we're just going to chain stitch them. You see how I just add this to this one, and then I came down and I sewed this one, and we're going to do this as many times as we need rows. So it's going to depend on the size quilt that you're going to be making, because each of these blocks finishes at 6 by 12. So it's a really easy size to work with. But here's what I want to show you. So everything is sewn exactly the same way. All the strip sets are sewn into their rows in the same direction. Everything is then pressed. Notice how everything is pressed upward. Everything is pressed upward. Then what we're going to do is take every other row and turn it around. So this way, now obviously I'm going to need to put another, well, you know, I'm okay with them repeating side by side because I only have, I don't know, 5 or 6 different prints. So it's going to be pretty likely that they'll fall next to each other. But you'll see how this fits really well. So then what we're going to do, we flipped every other row. We're going to put these together and sew them. And because we sewed our seams all in the same direction, when we flip it, they're going to be opposite. So we're going to be able to nest that seam right there. And then once that's all sewn together, we have our first pair of strips all complete. And once these rows are finished, you're going to just add them all together side by side, alternating the row, and then your quilt will be completed. It goes so very quickly. So if you look at this block right here, when this finishes, this is going to be 12 inches. It has the 10 inches. Actually, no, it's going to be shorter than that because this finishes at 9.5 and this finishes at 2. So it'll be 11.5 by 6 inches. And it works out really well. It's a great layout. The colors, like I said, this is great for a scrappy quilt. And you can do so much. You can decide to go really bold with these or use black or white or bright yellow, whatever. There's so much flexibility for you to create your own design the way you want it with the colors that you have. So that's how this works. Now let me show you the original quilt, and I want you to see how that looks finished. And you had a quick peek at this earlier, but I do just want to show you how wonderful all these colors look together. And this little offset, I think that's what makes this quilt. it ties it all together with a really nice cohesive design that follows throughout the quilt, balancing our colors in the blocks. So if you have roughly 3 color schemes, then you can line them up accordingly, but you're going to have different fabrics, and that's what's great. So when you put these together, they are going to be similar in color, but they're not going to be the same prints, and that is really going to add so much more interest. And I love some of these prints. Oh my goodness, this is very reminiscent because a lot of these were quilts I had made obviously before this one, and I took some of my favorites that I had left over and put them in here. There's just some wonderful batiks. Most of these are batiks, and the one I made, the most current one too, there's a lot of batiks in there. But you know, the multicolors, the dots, you know, the circles, everything adds so much dramatic impact. And then even with these background pieces, the rails, the fact that they have a white to cream background makes them all similar and ties it together. But the prints on top can be very different, and it still works really, really well. So that's what I wanted to show you, is just to take a look at some of these and how this works and how it goes together. I don't know, this is a pretty good size. This one, let's see, I think I have about, it's 10 blocks wide, so it's 60 inches, and it's 6 blocks long at, what, 11 and a half, which is about 70-ish. So this is probably in the 60 by 70 inch range, which is a great lap size, and it goes together so quickly, which is what's wonderful. And there you have it. We have a wonderful quilt, and I'll get a shot of the whole one laid out so you can see that too. I've got to make a pattern for this. This is fantastic. I know you're going to love it. It's easy to make. You may not need a pattern. You can probably just go ahead and get started. But it does help to have the pattern to get an idea of fabric and such. So I'll work on all those calculations and see what I can come up with. But in the meantime, I hope you have a chance to make a quilt. Make something wonderful, whatever you're excited about. Choose some great fabrics, go through your scraps, pick your favorites, and use those and create something wonderful so that you can enjoy that. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, please. I'd love for you to subscribe so we can share more quilts together. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.